Okay, so today's topic is data-driven e-learning design with XAPI. So really, we're looking at how we can use data to improve our e-learning design. So I guess the most important question is, what is XAPI? So XAPI is short for the Experience API, and before it was known as XAPI, it was known as Project Tin Can. So if you're familiar with Articulate Storyline or other similar authoring tools, and you see that publish option, publish to Tin Can, that's basically XAPI. So it is a technical specification for the learning and development industry. It basically tells you how to structure, send, and retrieve data. So it basically makes sure that everyone's speaking the same language whenever we're working with this learning and performance data. And that is what it's designed to track. So experiences in e-learning courses, like a slide-based e-learning course of something like Articulate Storyline. But you can also use XAPI to track experiences in simulations, mobile apps, so like learning apps, just websites, like a typical website you would go to any day, all sorts of stuff. And not just the learning data, but also the performance data. So you can take data from the business systems where people are actually making calls and qualifying leads and making sales, and you can put all of that data together and compare the effect that your learning data is having, look at correlations between the learning and performance data. So good stuff there. XAPI data is always sent via statements. So this is an important concept for XAPI. The cool thing about them is that the statements are human and machine readable. When you're first looking at an XAPI statement, it might look a little bit overwhelming, but we had a session where we broke that down. Some people in the chat can attest to this. It takes maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and then you can read them pretty well as a human, and the machine can also parse them super efficiently. So this is the format they follow, like in a plain English kind of way. And when you're looking at a stream of XAPI statements, this is the type of stuff you'll be seeing. It follows this actor, verb, object format. So you see here, Devlin completed the XAPI 101 course, or Sue viewed the XAPI 101 resource. So you see just actor, verb, and then object. And then, it can even be things that aren't just more common everyday tasks. Mark ate a sandwich. You're probably not going to be sending XAPI statements like that, but I just want to demonstrate how simple it is. It's just like a basic sentence, an actor, a verb, and an object. And that will be your stream of data you're looking at. And you're not restricted to only an actor, a verb, and an object. You can add a lot more information onto that, and we'll take a look at that soon. So all of these XAPI statements get sent to a learning record store. So, you have your e-learning course, it's generating all of this data, all of these XAPI statements, and they get sent off to this LRS, which is an important concept in the XAPI space. It's basically a database that holds all of these XAPI statements, and they usually have analytics capabilities so that you can create graphs and run reports and do other fun things like that. Hello, Matt. Thank you for joining. Hey, J-Rock. Cool. So if you're in the e-learning space in any capacity, you've probably at least heard of or seen SCORM. So when you're publishing an e-learning course for a learning management system, you're usually publishing it as a SCORM package. So the main data we look at when we have a SCORM package is, did the person start the course? Did they open it? Did the person complete the course? Did they make it all the way through? And then finally, what did the person score on the single quiz or assessment that we're able to track in each SCORM course? If you have multiple quizzes, you can only collect data on one. Now, there are some ways to kind of like hack SCORM and get some more specific data, but it's much more complicated than we're going to look at with XAPI. And I also want to add a note here. We've mentioned authoring tools being able to publish for Tin Can or publish XAPI packages out of the box. That data is basically a very slightly more detailed version of this. So what the authoring tools give you by default, it's not the super juicy XAPI data that you can get if you do some custom tracking, which we can talk about later. So now let's look at what's possible with XAPI data. So not only are we tracking, did they start the course, did they complete the course, and what did they score on the quiz, but we can see exactly what they're clicking or selecting within a course. So if we have some optional, if we have like a tab interaction, we can see which tabs the users are clicking on. If we have optional resources, we can see if the users are accessing them. It's common to have like little tooltips or markers over images that users can explore to access additional content. You can use XAPI to see exactly how they're interacting with those pieces. Of course, you can also track quiz scores, and not just one, but if you have 5 quizzes in a course, you can collect a specific score for each one of those. My favorite is duration. So you can see how long someone is spending on a specific slide. You can see how long they're looking at that specific tooltip. You can see how long they're spending on a question, on a quiz, on an entire course. It's up to you how granular you want to get with these timers to see how long people are spending on your content. This is a common one. So many organizations, we track compliance by looking at completion data. If you have some duration data tied in with that, and you can see that people are completing these courses in an average of 1 or 2 minutes, just spam clicking that next button, it's probably not making a super strong case that these employees are certified and compliant with whatever standards they're supposed to be compliant with. This one is really cool. You can track individual question responses. So this is, we're referring to multiple choice questions in a quiz, but also open response questions where maybe you have someone type in a paragraph or a few sentences and everyone's going to type in something different. You can capture all of those responses and put them in a nice, easy to read report using XAPI and a learning record store. So the XAPI can also track media. So you can include documents, pictures, and videos with an XAPI statement. Now, as an example, you could have an app where maybe at some face-to-face workshop, maybe we don't have those in the COVID times, but if we did, maybe a face-to-face workshop and it's some kind of role play sales activity, you can have an app where you kind of record your partner going through the activity. You can rate them on a rubric, and then it would send an XAPI statement with that recording and with the rubric. So if there's a manager or a supervisor who wants to review it later, they can actually see that session. So that's a really cool part about XAPI. This one, yeah, good point, Jonathan. It's not just, oh, did they get it right or wrong? It's, okay, here are the 4 choices. We can see this percentage of people answered choice A, and it will actually say the contents of what choice A is. And you can look at a nice pie chart and see, what percentage of people are getting it right, what percentage of people are choosing this distractor. Is this distractor maybe too distracting? Really cool stuff. Web tab switches. So this one isn't as common, but you definitely can do it. You can see every time someone unfocuses your e-learning course or your assessment. So if you find that every time one of your employees or one of your students gets to a new question, they're hopping to a new tab and then coming back a few minutes later, you can maybe draw some conclusions that they're either 1, distracted, or 2, maybe using some outside resources to answer those questions. You can get really specific video interaction data, so you can see which parts of these videos are people watching. Are they muting the videos? Are they just skipping to the end? Which parts are they rewatching? That's an important metric as well. And you can do a whole lot more. So basically, any kind of activity that users are doing in an e-learning course with their mouse, you can basically track it, and their keyboard. So it's just using JavaScript to track this stuff, and JavaScript is the language of the web, really, so you can get pretty specific with your tracking. Now, any questions about this so far? Because I'm going to dive into a somewhat specific example just to try to illustrate some of these points and how we would use this data. So if you have any questions about what's possible, let me know. Otherwise, we'll continue. Okay, I know there's probably like a 30 to 60 second delay, so if you do have a question, I'll just stop and address it. But let's consider this call handling 101 e-learning program, okay? So this is an e-learning program to onboard new call center agents. These are people who are going to be taking phone calls and helping these customers of a specific company. We don't need to get too specific. So we'll say we have 3 modules, an empathy module, a call flow module, an issue resolution module. That's fine. These are all important skills for a call center agent. And in each module, say we have an introductory video to set the context. Then the user goes through this guided practice scenario where they're actually helping make choices on a phone call, but we're really giving them the answers. And then they're on their own. And then it's like, okay, now you need to use this skill set on this branching scenario and make these choices on your own and try to pass the scenario without making too many mistakes. And when they're going through that scenario, we provide them a job aid and a video that they can access on demand. So when they're trying to, help this fake customer, they can, press get help or something like that, and they can pull up a job aid or a video that is intended to obviously help guide them to the right answer. So we're going to talk about how we can use XAPI data to improve content and activity effectiveness. So say we want to make these 3 modules as good as we can possibly make them, because we want to make sure that when people get through them, they can perform their job well. Okay, they can actually handle these calls in the real world. So what we're going to look at to measure this effectiveness is the learning data and the performance data, of course. We want to see how are people performing not only in the e-learning modules on those branching scenarios, but how are they performing on the job? And when we make these assessments and we're trying to determine, is our content helping? Does our content need to be improved? We're going to look at correlations, and we're also going to conduct A/B tests or split tests. So if this sounds overwhelming, it should get clearer now. We're going to talk about specifically what we would look at. So we'll say in one of these modules in our call center training, we have a high number of these employees just downright failing, okay? So they're maybe getting like a 50% or something. They're definitely not getting it through it on the first try or maybe even the second try. Well, what we can look at is we can say, okay, well, this job aid in this video, they're supposed to be helping these people get through these branching scenarios. So let's compare how people are engaging with that content and how they're performing on the branching scenario. So we would say, show us the average quiz score of all of the users who looked at both the job aid and the video. Okay, and that's a fairly easy query to make in a learning record store, in most learning record stores. So maybe we find people who are viewing these job aids and videos, they're performing just as poorly as the people who are not viewing those job aids and videos. Okay, so it seems like our job aids and videos are not helping, either that or our actual scenario is faulty. So we would use this data to inform our design. So we see now there's clearly a problem. People are failing this. Our content isn't helping them. And the name of the game here is experimentation and iteration. So without a lot of qualitative data where the people are telling you this is what is wrong, if you're only working from this XAPI data, you need to experiment and you can use your best judgment. Maybe we look at the job aid and we're like, okay, yeah, this is kind of muddled. The content isn't as organized as it could be. Let's try to clear up this job aid, based off of this data. So maybe we do make those fixes. We spend a few days fixing up that job aid, going back to our subject matter expert. And now we find that the people who are viewing the job aid, maybe they are passing the scenario on the first try because it is helping them do what they need to do. But at that point, here's where the iteration comes into play. Maybe you realize now a lot of people aren't viewing this job aid. Maybe we know that it helps and it's effective, but people aren't accessing it. So then you can make decisions about how to draw more attention to it. Maybe you bring it into the flow. And I think I addressed that a little bit later as well. So A/B testing or split testing is the other side of this. So, you can always say, okay, causation doesn't equal correlation. Maybe you improve the job aid, but maybe these new employees are just just slicker overall. Maybe they just really get the content better. And that's fine. Doing this approach with an A/B test would be if you improve the job aid, and then if you, with half of the audience, you gave them the improved job aid, and the other half of the new hires, they still use the old job aid. Then if you started to see, okay, these people with the new job aid are clearly performing better, this cohort, that's how you can really be more scientific about these improvements and make a better case for causation. So here's another example of that. So say, this manager is getting frustrated. They're like, okay, yeah, the job aid is fine, but why isn't this video helping? I'm going to contact this neuroscience-backed video production company. they can redo all the videos for 50 grand. It's going to make our course so much better. It's going to make our course super effective. So what you can propose as, the learning and development data-driven expert is to A/B test one of the videos. Maybe the manager just commissions one of them. We say, okay, let's see if this video will actually make a big difference. We'll swap out this video in this specific module. And then, like we were just saying with the job aid, half the audience, half the new hires, you show this new video, and the other half you show whatever video you had previously. So if you don't notice the difference on performance, and in this case, maybe there's not, then you realize, okay, maybe this neuroscience-backed video isn't really making much of a difference. We need to keep iterating, trying new things, figuring out how to improve this performance on the course. And the e-learning performance is just one side of things, because remember, if it's designed well, then this branching scenario should mirror what people are doing in the real world, and presumably, if people are performing well on this scored branching scenario, then they're going to perform well on these real world calls. So we would want to look at things like average handle time, like issue resolution rate, customer satisfaction rating. These are all really common metrics if you're in any kind of customer service world or call center world. But you want to also look, some sort of metrics, on the job metrics you want to look at, maybe even that's employee turnover or something. You want to see how you're moving the needle, but that's probably a whole other presentation. The takeaway here is with this XAPI data, you can actually look at those comparisons. Does viewing the job aid not just help people perform better on the scenario, but is it helping move the needle on these real world metrics? And if you are changing or improving the course itself, is that affecting the real world metrics? Okay, so we're moving on from overall effectiveness. And this is what I think the strongest case for, at least when you're getting started with XAPI, is it serves as a spotlight for user experience issues. So if there's one thing I've seen people care about when it comes to e-learning data, it's course completions. So you can use XAPI as a spotlight pointing to these issues like, okay, you need to look into this. And you can optimize not only for ease of use to make it easier for people to get to, access the content they need, but also for completion. So, I'm going to go through this. We're going to look at some examples. And if you can see where people are dropping off or where people are losing interest or getting stuck, then you can fix those specific issues and make sure that a much higher percentage of the people are actually getting through the course and completing it. And you notice the second bullet point here, combine qualitative and quantitative data. Those are big words. Everyone might not be familiar with them. Qualitative data is like more subjective data. It's the kind of data you get when people fill out surveys and they say, I have this issue, I'm experiencing this. Quantitative data is more hard numbers, metrics, percentages. So that's what I think about XAPI data. All of this data that's automatically getting generated whenever someone clicks on a button or selects an answer choice. That's what I view as quantitative data. How long they're spending on the slide, that sort of thing. Okay, so let's talk about optimizing for completion. So let's say in our example course, we find that people are leaving on specific slides. So one of those, so we're looking at our data and we say, okay, these two slides, like maybe 80% of the people who quit the course early, it's happening on one of these two slides. So we look at the first one and we find that, yeah, maybe it's just like a wall of text. We don't know how it got overlooked during the design and development, but clearly people aren't really vibing with having to read 3 paragraphs or whatever it is on one slide. So maybe we split it up into multiple slides. And then of course we would watch that data and see, are people still leaving on one of these 3 slides? If so, maybe it's a content issue. Maybe we need to split it up even further, cut it down into a more animated video, and whatever it takes to make sure that we're not losing a vast majority of our audience at that section. And then maybe the other slide where people are leaving is a part of this branching scenario where if they go through the branching scenario, making this exact sequence of choices, maybe they get stuck because the developer made like a little error in the programming and they just get stuck on this slide. They can't go back, they can't go forward. It's just a development problem. The cool thing about XAPI is instead of relying on some survey data or someone saying, oh, I got stuck on one of the slides, and then handing it to your developer and saying, oh yeah, figure out where they got stuck and how, you have all of the XAPI data is saying exactly what sequence of actions that user was taking. So you can say, okay, this exact series of choices, this is what's leading to that bugged slide because a variable was messed up or something. So if you hand that to the developer, they can actually follow their programming down that exact path, and it would be a matter of minutes that it would take them to isolate the issue versus hours if you didn't have that kind of user experience data. So once again, that's the point, revise and iterate, try to fix these things based off of the data you have, and then monitor the data to make sure that it's improved. And if not, you need to go back to the drawing board. We'll talk about the effort this takes later on as well. Obviously, it's not as simple as pressing publish, putting it on the LMS, and then moving on to the next course. All right, ease of access. I think I touched on this idea earlier. Maybe we have these optional resources that are in really good shape and we know they're helping people improve performance, but people aren't accessing them. And this is based on, a lot of this is based off of real life projects I've worked on and real life situations I've faced. Then I've used data to identify this exact issue where we have this nice learn more button that provides all of the supporting content that these people were looking for. And we knew that from the survey responses. They were like, it'd be nice to have more content before answering the questions, et cetera, et cetera. And when we looked at the data, we found that like a very small minority of people were actually selecting that learn more button and accessing those optional resources. So then you need to make decisions about how you're going to make sure people know that's there. Is this content important enough that we make it mandatory and bring it into the content flow? Decisions like that are much easier when you have XAPI data to back them up. Okay, any questions so far? I know I've been talking quickly. We are moving fast. I want to take just a minute just to see if anyone, has any questions before we keep moving, because we're going to get into a new concept with this, and this is something I'm really excited about. All right, if we are good, we will keep moving. Again, I know there's a delay, so feel free to ask your questions still at any point. So far, so good? Okay, cool. Nice, thank you. So this is really cool. This is how we're going to collect quantitative and qualitative data. So not just all of the automatic usage data about what choices people are making, how long they're spending on the slides, where they're exiting the course, that sort of thing. But here's the situation, okay? So, we've looked at the quantitative data, and we've seen, okay, people are exiting the course, people are having all these issues. Why are our employees not giving us this feedback on the end of course survey? Like, why are we having to figure this out from the XAPI data? So maybe we reach out to some of those employees and we say, yeah, we've noticed that people are struggling with certain aspects of the course, and some people are failing in this scenario over and over. Why didn't you fill out that end of course survey? Why didn't you mention these problems in the survey? And of course, they give many reasons. They say, oh, by the time I got to the end of the course, I forgot about the issue I was having, or, oh, I didn't remember how to describe it, so I didn't want to confuse anyone. There's all sorts of reasons. People don't want to take the time. They just want to get back to their job. They don't want to fill out this survey at the end of the course when they're already ready to move on. So get this. This is an awesome solution to that. You can create an XAPI-enabled feedback widget that sits at the bottom of every slide. So, you can just have like when you go to a site and they have those little chat bubbles at the bottom and it's like, chat with me now and talk to a live agent or whatever it is. You can have a little button or widget like that sitting on a certain part of your slide that says give feedback or provide feedback. And now you can collect that qualitative data in the flow of everything else. So you can see, okay, these are the exact actions that the user took to get to this slide. And then when they press that little feedback button, they can type in exactly what their feedback is and what problem they're experiencing it. And that gets situated right in the statement stream next to all of their usage data, all of the qualitative data. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up now saying these over and over. But yeah, so that's a really cool way to use XAPI. If you're already collecting all of this information automatically, you can add that. It gets situated right in there, and now you have all of this feedback in context. You can see exactly what slide they're on when they're giving that feedback. It takes the impetus off of the person going through the course to try to explain exactly what's going on and exactly what the issue is. So this is one of my favorite parts about, what's possible with an XAPI enabled course. So again, that's right, using that qualitative data to inform the quantitative data. You can see people are spending 5 minutes on this slide and it shouldn't take that long. But then when you look at the qualitative data, maybe you see, oh, the next button is disabled for 3 minutes. Like, why can't I press next? And then you say, oh, it's a programming error. That's the problem. So if you're combining those two types of data, troubleshooting and optimizing that course is going to be a piece of cake if you put in that upfront work to collect this type of data. All right, so moving on to a different type. So, so far we've been talking about the data we can collect with XAPI and how we can use that data to, make more informed decisions. Right. But now we're talking about integrated learning experiences. So these are types of experiences that XAPI makes possible that maybe wasn't possible before, or that would take some more custom work. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, this removes the need for a learning management system. And I'm going to give you a specific example of a project I've worked on like this. And just adding on again, XAPI, it's not that you can only send XAPI statements from eLearning courses. Like I mentioned earlier, you can send XAPI data from apps, websites, the learning management system interface itself. So many things, simulations, actual machines too. Like, you can collect XAPI data from like an actual plane or an actual vehicle, as long as you have, savvy developers who know how to like hook up all of that stuff. But that's the cool thing about XAPI. It's super flexible. It's the experience API, so it can track all sorts of different experiences. Here's the cool part though. Data streams from one tool can trigger events in another tool. So a simple example of this, and I think the one that makes it pretty exciting, is you using all of this XAPI data that you're collecting. You can set it so that if an XAPI statement matches certain criteria, so for example, if this user fails this specific quiz, you can trigger an event in your email automation system and automatically send them an email with additional resources and tips, and maybe a link to take the quiz again or try the course again. So that's just one quick example, but there are a lot of possibilities with this. Okay, Lauren made a comment about how this data would also be excellent for improving the user experience on a website. And so if anyone is somewhat familiar with web development, you probably are familiar with Google Analytics. And Google Analytics can collect a lot of data. You can do some custom setup and you can see what people are clicking, which pages people are viewing, how long they're spending on them, and so on and so forth. But the biggest differentiator between Google Analytics and XAPI is that with XAPI, you can tie all of these actions and events to a single person. Okay. With Google Analytics, it's all anonymous, it's aggregated. You can see 500 people click this button, 2,000 people click this button. But with XAPI, you can dive into a single user's journey across so many things and whatever you're tracking, not just one course. You can see, okay, are the decisions the user is making in this course, and is the content that the user is accessing in course A, how is that affecting their performance in this final exam course 10 courses down the line? Okay, so you can track one person's experience across all of this. And when you bring that performance data into the equation too, you can not only see how they're doing on the learning activities and on the e-learning courses, but you can see how they're applying what they learned on the job. So really cool. That's the difference. And I have some clients and they're like, Google Analytics or XAPI, which should be used? That's the big difference. It's, do you want to be able to tie it to one person's journey? Okay. So this is an example. You might have seen me post about this, but I built this XAPI Challenges app. It's not like a super fancy app you're going to download from the App Store or something like that. I'll show you what it looks like. It's basically what I did. So I have 10 free tutorials on my website that show you how to do this custom XAPI work and how to collect this data from e-learning. So almost everything we've talked about, measuring how long someone's spending on a slide, seeing exactly what they're clicking and viewing and how they're answering questions. I have a series of 10 tutorials that show you how to do all of that stuff. So what I wanted to do is put together this XAPI challenges app so that there were some associated quizzes and statement sending challenges for each of these tutorials. So basically a way for people to practice what they learn, and a way for me to look at the data and see, okay, where are people struggling? Am I not making this clear enough in my tutorial? Kind of giving me a pulse on how my tutorials are actually helping. So, for each of these challenges, there's a quiz that I developed in Storyline. And then for some of them, once you pass the quiz, then you get an email automatically, and it says, okay, now that you've passed this quiz, you need to try sending this XAPI statement to my learning record store. So, I give them the endpoint. I tell them this XAPI statement has to meet these criteria. And then when they send that statement and that my learning record store receives it, I have some automation set up where it automatically checks that statement. And if it meets all of the criteria, then it automatically gives them credit for it in the app. You can see this progress bar on the photo on the left. There's a leaderboard showing, how many challenges each person has completed from most to least. So I'm not going to dive super in depth into this here, but you can see how many different tools are involved with this. And XAPI data and a tool called Zapier are really powering all of this. So you can see I'm using 2 different learning record stores. I'm using this Glide apps tool. It's really nice. It lets you build an app from a Google Sheet as the backend. I have these Storyline quizzes. I have these tutorials on my website. I have my email automation system out here. Data is going, into tools, out of tools. It's all connecting. I'm actually, if anyone is interested in this, I am going to dive much. Wait, is everyone still here? Can people say in the chat they're just here? On my end, it's showing no one's in this session, and there's just a bunch of people in it a minute ago. Oh, still here? Okay, it must be just a weird UI issue then on Crowdcast. Okay, good. We're still moving then. So next week, I'm gonna, okay, nice, good. Just a weird glitch. It shows that there's one person here. What's Zapier's connection? So Will, I'm actually going to, Joe. Okay, next week, I'm going to dive in depth, and we're going to do a whole session on how I made all of this work together and built this. And I'm going to do a write-up of it too this weekend. So if you are interested in how all of this is working together, it does get kind of nerdy and pretty technical. But just to quickly answer your question, Will, Zapier is helping the data move from Watershed to the Google Sheet. That's why I'm using Watershed, because they have that native integration. And it's helping move data from my email automation tool to and from Watershed. So for example, whenever I get these statements, when the person sends the statement, I'm sending them an email automatically saying, good job. When they fail a quiz, I have an email sequence. So, it will wait a day to see if you pass it. And then it will say, oh, I see that you failed that quiz. Check out the tutorial again, give it another try. And then it's a sequence too. So if 3 days go by or a week goes by and they don't try it again, they get another email follow-up, like a nudge saying, come back, give this another try, reach out to me if you need help. So it's really automated, and I get emails, from people responding to those automated emails, telling me their issue. So it's really good. It gives me an opportunity to help people that maybe otherwise wouldn't have reached out. So we'll dive into that next week. That session is up on my Crowdcast if you want to sign up for that. Oh, and here's the link if you want to actually try the challenges yourself. So no background knowledge is required, but but this does get technical, okay? So this is showing you how to use JavaScript to collect that specific data that we were talking about this whole presentation, basically. And there are quite a few people here in this chat who went through this with me. I did a 10-week series where we went tutorial by tutorial and worked through it together. All of that is available as an archive. I have YouTube videos too, if you prefer that over text-based tutorials. Long story short, the content is there if you want to learn how to do this, but it's not as easy as just pressing publish. The good news is that once you take the upfront time to learn how to do it, it does become just as easy as creating a new trigger in Storyline or your authoring tool of choice. Once you get familiar with it, you can track this kind of stuff very efficiently and very quickly, but there is a bit of a learning curve. Okay, so let's talk about the other barriers. So, all of this sounds awesome. XAPI data can be really helpful, but as many of you have probably noticed, the vast majority of learning and development teams and departments are not using XAPI data. They're still using SCORM. And XAPI is like the evolution to this. So, one potential barrier for this is that to use XAPI and to send these XAPI statements, you need a learning record store that can hold these statements. Now, these can get expensive. Like I think the cheapest paid option for Watershed is like $2,000 a month. Okay, that's the high end. That's like definitely on the high end. I think, and I also should state that almost all of these learning record stores have free plans with different types of restrictions. Like Watershed, you can send as many statements as you want and hold as much data as you want there. You just won't have access to all the really powerful like analytics tools and the reporting engine and stuff like that. But what you can always do is once a month, if you want, just download it to an Excel sheet and you can create your own visualizations and charts and reports using all of this data. Veracity Learning Record Store, they're one of my favorites lately because even on their free plan, you have like full access to their reporting capabilities, their graph builders. They're really developer friendly. And their pricing, I think their next plan up is like $100 a month or something, which for any team, that's probably pretty affordable. And there's all sorts of different options. If you see this call to action button, learn more about XAPI, I list a few more LRS options, but there are a bunch out there, and I'm sure you can find one that works with your budget or needs. And there are free options if you're just experimenting. Okay, it of course takes more time to actually do the evaluation, to look at the data and make decisions about how you're going to spend your time improving this course or this interaction. I'd say for some courses, maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe all of your stakeholders and everyone's fine with just putting the course online and moving to the next one. But if there really is an emphasis on making that e-learning good and making sure it's effective, like I guess if the e-learning is designed to improve performance, which I would argue all e-learning in some shape or form should lead to performance improvements, then it's probably going to be worth it spending some extra effort in optimizing those offerings after you put them out there for the world in the first place. Privacy concerns. So, there is GDPR. Before, I thought there was only, one learning record store that really emphasized that GDPR compliance. But I see now they all have options if you need to be GDPR compliant. They give you, they have ways to get rid of those statements if a user requests all of their data to be deleted. And if you are just hosting these learning experiences on the open web, you can anonymize the actor. So instead of saying Devlin Peck selected this, it would be like user 872156. And the cool thing about that is you can cache their unique identifier. So, even though we don't know who that user is, they just have a string of numbers. If they open a different course from us, or if they leave that course and come back in a week and they're using that same web browser, we would be able to see that it's that same person because they would have those same numbers because we would have cached them in the browser. So, that's always an option. I've done that for some projects that are just like on the open web where we don't need that specific information, specifically for European audiences where they don't want to have to get into the GDPR compliance, issues. And then, of course, there is the implementation effort required. The good news about that is if you have some time to learn how to do this, everything you need is out there on the web, on my site, on other sites. But I have spent a lot of time trying to make it as easy to learn, or to make sure you have all of the resources you need to learn how to do this. Does XAPI work with Cornerstone? Laura, that's a good question. The cool thing about this approach, about this custom XAPI approach where I'm talking about, I have all of these tutorials and guides, you can send those XAPI statements from a SCORM package, from an HTML5 package, maybe even from an AICC package. I haven't ever played around with that. But I don't see why not. So you don't have to publish for XAPI to collect all of this super specific XAPI information. When you publish to XAPI, you're going to get the default XAPI tracking that the authoring tool gives you. And that will be, did they start the course? Did they complete the course? What did they score on the quiz? And which slides did they view? I think that's one that they often have. And it'll just take the title of your slide and it will say, Devlin experienced this slide. And it will give you a ton of data in your LRS. Maybe not the most useful, and you don't have any control over that. But if you want to go in and say, okay, I want an XAPI statement to fire whenever someone does this, and you want to be the one who decides which data gets sent and how you structure it, you can do that from any kind of e-learning package. And I guess my point with that is if you can, any learning management system, you can host a SCORM package on, right? I would assume, or basically sending this custom XAPI data does not depend on any LMS function capabilities. So you don't need to worry, oh, is my LMS XAPI compliant? Because if you use this custom approach, you don't need your LMS to be XAPI compliant. All you need is a learning record store. So, I mean, if you are interested in XAPI, it is a really good idea to put pressure on your LMS vendors to become LMS or XAPI compliant. Not to get too far down a rabbit hole, but a lot of these barriers are going to disappear, or at least this LRS cost one is. Okay, I don't want to lose anyone, but there is, you may or may not have heard of something called CMI5. Okay, so what that is it's an XAPI profile that basically says, here are 10 types of XAPI statements we're going to send with these specific verbs, and that's going to replace SCORM. So SCORM right now is handling all of the LMS to e-learning package communication. CMI5 is what's going to replace that LMS to e-learning. This custom XAPI tracking is just adding like icing on the cake and getting all this specific stuff from the e-learning package. But once CMI5 replaces SCORM, CMI5 is powered by XAPI, so it will need a learning record store to function. So that means any LMS vendor that wants to support CMI5 will need an LRS, or will need a capability to connect an LRS. So I think, and that's in final stages of adoption. I don't want to get too far into it. There's a really good article I can share that goes into this and the pending adoption. And maybe it doesn't go anywhere, but I really think that that's going to push this forward and start actually moving us away from SCORM in a meaningful way. So that's a good question. I forgot to mention that. Any other questions? So we covered a lot of ground. I know I talk fast, and that was a lot of text. So thank you for bearing with me. This article is by Art Workington. He runs Risk. It seems like they've been in the game a really long time with LMS and now LRS stuff. And he has some, he knows a lot about the history of this and the really technical sides of it. So there's his article. I think this is the one. It's just about CMI5 and its current state of adoption with the Department of Defense and how it's a similar trajectory that SCORM followed, where once the DoD adopted SCORM, that's when the rest of the industry was quickly following suit and making sure that they were catching up. And you can already see, I think a couple of months ago, Storyline added a CMI5 publishing option. CMI5, though, that is something that's going to rely on your LMS. Your LMS will have to be able to support CMI5 content. Cool. So I'll stop sharing my screen in a second just so we can tackle some more questions. I did have just this, next steps. If you want to learn how to do this, I'd say the best place to get into the ecosystem is with this XAPI Challenges app, just to add some more accountability to getting you through these tutorials. I have more XAPI content coming, so if you want to follow me on Crowdcast, no pressure. I usually do it at the same time every week on this Thursday. We've been going strong for 3 months now. We're coming up on with this time slot. And I also have a Slack community that is good. It grew out of this XAPI Challenges app, and then we kind of opened it up and made it about all things e-learning and instructional design. So I would say this is the best place to ask questions. There's an XAPI channel, and I help a lot of people. People reach out to me directly, but we have people in this Slack channel who have gone through all of these tutorials, and I think they can help you just as well as I can in some cases. So to join that, whenever you sign up for a mailing list, you'll automatically get an invite. And if you signed up for this Crowdcast, you'll get an email 24 hours after you register asking if you want to join the mailing list. So if you just join that, you'll automatically get a Slack invite.